The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Chapter 8. Encountering an Optional Gate and Challenging It. After the mysterious incident in which Evbegia's outer walls turned into golems, the people of the city began working on the large-scale construction to rebuild it with heavy hearts. The Adventurers Guild set E-Class adventurers to carry out human wave tactics to defend the city, and the country's government requested for renowned mages and adventurers to be dispatched in order to investigate the incident. Meanwhile, the mastermind behind all of this was in the midst of an enjoyable journey by carriage. He was sitting on the hide of a beast, spread out inside the carriage in place of a cushion, listening to the cries of insects as he murmured to himself about how it would be autumn soon. Now that I think about it, this is the first time I've been on a journey. Technically, he had gone on a school trip while on Earth, but the ferry had blown up partway through and he had drowned, so it didn't count. In any case, he remembered that it wasn't exactly enjoyable. Speaking of journeys, a different atmosphere from your everyday life, new experiences, rare sights, delicious food, talking with family and friends. No, that's not a journey, it's a trip. How is a journey different from a trip? If your goal is to have fun, it's a trip. If it's not, then it's a journey. Dictionaries back on Earth probably defined it differently. So that's how it is. Vandaloo is much more knowledgeable than his mother. Darcia gave a small, happy-sounding laugh. Hearing only this conversation, one might think that it was the start of a happy family trip. However, the mother was the ghost of a dark elf, with traces of gruesome torture visible on her slightly glowing body. And the child that was sitting in the carriage had a shining red and bluish-purple eye. He was a 1-year-old Dhampir, with even less of a presence than the ghost. The carriage that they were riding on was moving without a driver or horses to pull it. It was a rank 2 undead monster, the Cursed Carriage. Flying in circles high up in the sky and keeping watch was the rank 3 Phantom Bird, a bird with a body of bones surrounded by a bluish glow. And protecting the carriages on all sides were rank 3 Skeleton Warrior and the bear, monkey, and wolf bone beasts. This group that was proceeding forward in the middle of the night looked like a monster parade, a small-scale pandemonium. If there were any adventurers nearby, the only 2 responses they would have to them would be either attack or run away. I think I'll go to sleep now. Before the sky gets brighter, I need to hide somewhere. Knowing this, Vandaloo and his party only traveled on the highway at night. They were heading to the Orbalm Kingdom, which had been in conflict with the Amid Empire for centuries. The original plan had been to head to the village where Darcia had been born and raised, the place where she had been living while she was still alive, but Darcia herself stopped them. I think it's better not to go to my birthplace. Since I went and died, there is no way to prove that Vandaloo is my child, and I'm not sure that everyone would believe my words as I am now. Vandaloo's skin was as white as a dead man's. His ears were pointed, but because of his skin color, one would not think that one of his parents was a dark elf. According to Darcia, the relationship between elves and dark elves of Lambda was not a good one. There were some elf clans that had friendly relations with dark elves, but they were a minority. Most elves hated dark elves and regarded them as the filthy elves birthed by Vita. And there was no need to even question what the dark elves thought about the people that hated them. If Darcia herself had been alive, they would have believed her, but unfortunately she had died. She did exist as a spirit, but the only ones who would be able to see her other than Vandaloo would be those who possessed rare jobs, such as a spiritualist. Also, I don't know if they'll forgive your father or not. Your father was a subordinate of a vampire that believed in the evil gods. The dark elf race had been birthed by the goddess Vita, and most of them lived while worshipping Vita and the spirits, while also intermingling with the other races created by Vita. Therefore, it made perfect sense that they were also friendly with vampires and dampirs, but only those that believed in gods other than Alda or the evil spirits. There were also races of monsters, such as Lamias and Skylas, that share a parent with the Dark Elf race, but if they were to be made obedient by tamers, it wasn't a problem. But the evil gods that were once the Demon King's subordinates are still enemies. Those who worshipped them, even if they were of races given birth by Vita, were considered traitors. It's a tough world we live in, Mother. Yes, that's why I think it would be better if we headed towards the Orbam Kingdom. The Orbam Kingdom and the Amid Empire made up the two halves of the Bon Gaia continent. The continent of Bon Gaia was sometimes called the Warhammer of Xantark because of the fact that it was shaped like the letter T. The Warhammer's handle part was thought to be the place where the fallen hero Zakart had faced his end for the second time, an area filled with high mountains and countless devil's nests. It was unexplored territory where even adventurers never set foot. The head part of the hammer was divided into two. In the west was the Amid Empire, and in the east was the Orbam Kingdom. They had been fighting one another for centuries to take over each other and unite the continent. The Orbam Kingdom had formed the alliance of many smaller countries that rebelled against the Amid Empire around 500 years ago. But since it was a union of countries now, it needed to be managed properly. For this purpose, they had made an electoral system called selective monarchy, where the royal families of the participating nations became dukes, and then a king was selected from among these. The term of the king was 10 years, and reappointment was only possible once. However, since the reappointment of a king was common, the effective period was usually 20 years. Politics in the Orbam Kingdom changed depending upon the personality and policies of the new king, but whatever the case, Alda's teachings, the state religion of the Amid Empire that was the enemy nation, should be weak. It seems like there are beastmen and titans among those who can be selected as kings, so a dampier such as Vandaloo should have no problem. Darcia had never been to the Orbam Kingdom herself, so she could not be sure. But since there were beastmen and titan among the candidates for the king's position, it was certain that the Vita's offspring were to be treated very differently compared to the ones in the Amid Empire. And so they were headed towards the Orbam Kingdom, but they were unable to follow the straightest, shortest path there. They had heard that a war between the Orbam Kingdom and the Amid Empire was close. This is a secret, okay? It's a special national-level secret information, okay? The spirit of a spy of the Amid Empire, who had died several months ago and gone slightly insane, told them this. Vandaloo actually wondered whether he should believe him or not, but it would be terrible if he ignored him, only to find out that the war had already started when he reached the border between Merg and Orbam. Of course, there would be increased security, and even if he managed to get through it to sneak out of this country, he wasn't sure if he could sneak into the next. Convincing a suspicious soldier that they weren't spies of the enemy would be no easy task. In fact, the soldiers would immediately assume that they were a small group of undead. There would be no monster tamer that they could spot at a single glance, so instead of, let's try talking to them first, they would surely think, let's get rid of them first. If I'm lucky, they'd take me into custody, but I don't want the undead that I took the time to raise to be destroyed. And who knows what they'd do if they found Mom. Vandaloo was just a 14-month-old child, so if they didn't pulverize everything, including the carriage, from long range using offensive magic, he would probably be taken into custody, but that was impossible for the undead. As for Darcia, she was unlikely to be discovered, as there was probably no soldier with the necromancer job. But if they took the bone she was residing in and buried it, she might just disappear this time. For that reason, they were not heading northeast to the Merg country that was closest to the Orbom Kingdom's border, but were rather heading southeast, towards the southern part of the continent, the area covered in high mountains and devil's nests. Crossing high mountains and devil nests will be difficult, but it's still better than coming into contact with humans. This was often true on Earth, too. Humans were the most fearsome creatures of all, and this was probably true for his situation right now. Incidentally, the reason why Vandaloo hadn't trained any golems or zombies till now was because he had been planning for this journey. The movements of golems were sluggish, and if he made them big to cover for that, they would be conspicuous even in the middle of the night. Zombies were the same. Their movements were also very sluggish. In movies on Earth, he had seen zombies that could run at the same speed as athletes, but you shouldn't expect fiction-like things in reality. Yes, this was a world of fantasy, but it was also reality. Also, in the case of zombies, he would have to use the corpses of the bandits or Orby and his companions, and they were hardly faces that he wanted to look at all day. That was another very important factor. And also, Vandaloo's little group was composed of just bones. Vandaloo's travels, except for the fact that they couldn't move around while the sun was up, was progressing smoothly. During the day, they hid in forests away from the highway and resumed their travels once night fell. If there were some peddlers or adventurers that were traveling along at night, they would go off the highway and continue on, and do the same for when there were guard stations or checkpoints in the way. Even though they were making steady progress, their pace was less than half of that of a normal traveler, but that could not be helped. I want to hurry and be able to travel boldly in the middle of the highway. He hadn't done anything wrong, well, except for his revenge. It was such an unfair world. He had to worry about the risk of beasts, monsters, or even bandits attacking them if they traveled off the highway, though that was quite rare. Just from seeing Bone Man or Bone Monkey protecting the carriage from far away, beasts and bandits would be discouraged from approaching. The wild beasts, such as wolves and bears, instinctively feared monsters, except in cases where the monster was plainly weaker than them. Bandits were the same. Their targets were merchants and travelers, not monsters. Of course, by defeating monsters, you could expect some gains like ingredients and experience points, but if they had the skills to take on monsters, they would be working as adventurers, not as bandits. And as for monsters themselves, there weren't many monsters that attacked other undead monsters, especially skeleton types that were just made of bones. The primary reason for a monster attacking another monster was to feed, but skeletons didn't have any edible parts. There were other reasons, such as territorial disputes and self-defense, but Vandaloo and the others never invaded the habitats or entered too far into the territory of other monsters, so the monsters did not do much other than wait and see what happens. Well, from time to time, monsters with low judgment capabilities decided to attack them. Bone Wolf dragged a twitching, almost half-dead goblin in front of the carriage's wheels. The goblin was crushed with a loud crunch. We haven't been able to gain levels these days by killing monsters like goblins, huh? Vandaloo didn't pay the goblin any attention as he left it behind. He didn't bother searching for a magic stone, let alone the right ear that adventurers took to prove that they had killed the monster. Darcia had told him that because the chances of finding a magic stone on a rank 1 monster was less than 1 in 100. Even many higher-ranking adventurers didn't bother searching monsters like goblins for them. Since Vandaloo had no way of even exchanging the magic stones for money, he decided to follow their example. What concerned him more was the difficulty he was having in raising the levels of his undead. When they were rank 1, their levels increased even when they killed a single monster together, even sharing the experience between all of them. But now, killing numerous monsters without sharing experience didn't even yield 1 level. The rank 2 carriage still increased in levels after running over some goblins, but the levels of the rank 3 undead weren't increasing at all. I suppose I have to kill more bandits after all, though I want the carriage to be rank 3 before we cross the mountain range. Vandaloo, rank 3 is normally considered quite strong, you know. It would take several normal rank 2 people to drive away one rank 3 monster. A rank 3 monster was so threatening that it could still trample one-sidedly over a group of normal people. At the very least, even normal citizens who were proud of their fighting skills or physically strong town guards wouldn't stand a chance. But, Mom, there aren't going to be any normal people in the place we're going to. And since I can't get any stronger myself right now, I want everyone to get stronger instead. I suppose that's true, though you'll be able to make golems quickly, so you'll be fine. This mother of Vandaloo's was an easygoing person, even after death. The Amid Empire had been founded by the descendants of Barod, a hero who was guided to this world long ago. The hero Barod stood on the front lines with the people who were forced to do battle against the Demon King's forces, and fought bravely. Within 10 days of coming to this world, he had defeated a dragon and rescued a nobleman's daughter, and the first lady who had been captured. Within a month, he had repelled a large army of giants together with the second lady, who was a warrior. Within half a year, he had fought the Knights of Darkness that the Demon King had sent, while protecting the third lady, who was a priestess and prevailed. And finally, after 10 years, he defeated the Demon King, even as Zakhart and the other heroes were lost, bringing peace to the world. It is said that he and the other surviving heroes offered their wisdom to help rebuild what had been destroyed. Much of the heroes' wisdom had been lost, but what remained was the hiragana, katakana, and kanji that was the commonly used writing system in this world, and the Amid village that eventually became the Amid Empire. And Balschmidt, the great first emperor of the Amid Empire, who appeared tens of thousands of years later, was a direct descendant of the hero Berud. It sounds made up and unpleasant. Vandaloo closed the book that had been mixed in with the bandits' treasure and threw it away violently. In Lambda, where technology for a printing process doesn't exist, every book was a written copy. Therefore, they were quite high-class items. But Vandaloo didn't see even a single copper coin's worth of value in the tales written about the actions of Berud, the hero who had founded the Amid Empire, and the first emperor, Balschmidt. Firstly, the whole thing sounded like nonsense. The proof that the first emperor of the Amid Empire was a direct descendant of the hero was incredibly questionable. Surely there was no way to prove a relationship with an ancestor who had lived 100,000 years ago. The book had covered this up with stories about destiny, prophetic dreams, and an illusion of the hero himself appearing and speaking to the emperor. Secondly, it was unpleasant because it made Vandaloo feel envious. The hero Berud. He was probably known as Suzuki in Japan, as it was a common name. He had manifested cheat-like abilities or something as soon as he arrived in Lambda, and within 10 days he had been known as a dragon-slaying hero who had rescued the princess. Within a month, 6 months, he had continued piling up achievements and connections, and after 10 years he was known as a great hero. What was Vandaloo compared to that? He couldn't help but ask this question to himself. 15 months had passed since he was born. The only member of the opposite sex that he had talked to was his own mother. It seemed impossible that he could become a great hero within 10 years. Of course, the hero, who was probably called Suzuki, had probably endured hardships and suffering of his own. He had survived the battle with his life on the line, after all. Even so, Vandaloo is all too aware of the difference between receiving a god's blessing and being cursed by that god instead. This is Rodcart's fault as well. You're right. It is all God Rodcart's fault, but even so, I'm a little thankful. It was that god who made you my child, Vandaloo. Mom. His splintered heart began to heal a little. Vandaloo reconsidered, thinking that perhaps he should at least be a little thankful to Rodcart for making Darcia his mother. But if it weren't for Rodcart's curse, he would be able to use death attribute magic at the level that he had been using it just before he died the second time in Origin. He would be able to employ countless golems freely, manipulate many spirits simultaneously, turn an entire lake of water into deadly poison, or reverse the process, turning deadly poison into pure water. If he had been able to do all of these things, perhaps Darcia wouldn't have had to die. When he thought about that, any gratitude he might have felt towards Rodcart was blown away. The carriage that had been proceeding along a side road to avoid being spotted suddenly stopped. What is it? Due to his danger sense death magic, he knew they weren't in any emergency situation, such as being surrounded by enemies or attacked by a powerful monster. The magic detected not only poisonous mushrooms and plants, but also the bloodlust given off by humans and monsters. Therefore, he shouldn't be in a dangerous situation, or so Vandaloo thought, as he poked his head out from inside the carriage to see a gate that led underground. A gate? A base used by bandits? Well, it's a little too well built to be something like that. Is it some kind of ruins? As Vandaloo tilted his head sideways, it was Sam who told him what the gate was. Young master, I believe this may be a dungeon. A dungeon? Yes, it is a dungeon. Because Vandaloo was inside the carriage, he couldn't see Sam, but he could hear his voice clearly. Dungeons. They were originally breeding facilities created by the Demon King to multiply his monster subordinates and increase their individual strength. Afterwards, Ricklint, the genie of time and magic, used his secret magic to turn them into places that humans could train and obtain materials. The basic principle behind their appearance was that when a certain place was corrupted with a certain amount of magic, there was a corresponding probability that a dungeon would form. Their shape, size, and degree of danger varied greatly, and some of the first dungeons that had appeared over 100,000 years ago still had not been discovered yet. There were dungeons that consisted of only one floor that couldn't be distinguished from a normal cave, home to only weak monsters like goblins. But there were also enormous fortress-like dungeons with over 100 floors, crawling with high-rank monsters that even A-class adventurers would have a tough time getting through. And as the requirements for the formation of a dungeon was for magical power to contaminate the earth, most dungeons existed only in devil's nests. Is this place a devil's nest? Probably not. If this were a devil's nest, we would be seeing a lot more monsters coming out. This is likely a rare dungeon that has appeared outside of a devil's nest. As Darcia said, dungeons forming in normal forests and fields were rare, but not unheard of. But in such cases, the dungeons were often not very dangerous. But if left alone for too long, the monsters multiplying inside the dungeon would eventually emerge from it and turn the surrounding area into a devil's nest. There were apparently continents in Lambda whose entire land, surface, and surrounding oceans had become devil's nests due to this process repeating numerous times. So then there should be a lot of monsters in there that aren't too strong. Judging from the grass growing thickly in front of the gate, it seems that adventurers haven't been here in a while. All right, let's stop by and go inside. Dungeons, the fantasy-like sound to the word and the sense of adventure excited Vandaloo, though the ones who would actually do the adventuring and fighting, the monsters, would be Bone Man and the other undead. That couldn't be helped since he was only 15 months old. Around the time that Vandaloo was preparing to enter his first dungeon, Dagon, the guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild in the town of Taro, was watching 3 adventurers glaring at each other with a troubled look on his face. The 3 people here were each a leader of an adventurer party that was well known here in Taro. Cashew, the leader of D-Class Adventurers Party, the Wind Chasers, Barn, the leader of a similar party called the Steel Wings, and Miranda, the leader of the White Stars. It was safe to say that none of them were famous on the national level in the country of Murg, and none of their abilities surpassed the D-Class level. However, in this modestly sized commercial town of Taro, where no devil's nests were nearby, they were top-class adventurers. In fact, they had repelled bandit attacks numerous times and overcome the explosive increase in the kobold population. They were known as heroes here in Taro. They had accepted a request to exterminate a lost ogre together and searched the forest near Taro and had discovered a dungeon on the way back. Only the members here, the town's feudal lord, and his aide knew about this, but Dagon was ecstatic as this was a big opportunity to develop the town. Indeed, the dungeon was dangerous. If left alone, monsters might emerge from it and advance onto the town. But if adventurers were to venture into it from time to time to thin out the monsters' numbers, it was essentially a chicken that laid an unlimited amount of golden eggs. The fact that monsters spawned without limit meant that there was a limitless amount of raw materials to be obtained from them, as well as precious plants and ores that could only be found inside dungeons. Not to mention the treasure chests that appeared in dungeons that could yield valuable magic items. Adventurers seeking this dungeon would gather in the town, and in turn, merchants seeking the gold that the adventurers would spend would also gather here, and thus the town would develop. And if the dungeon was cleared in this way, it would become a resource with greater returns than the risk. With that said, there was also dungeons in Lambda with only monsters such as goblins that yielded only small amounts of raw materials and treasure boxes with poor contents, the kind of dungeons that only caused trouble just by existing. Would this be one of those failures, or a great success? Most importantly, adventurers would need to be deployed onto the dungeon to determine how dangerous it is, and there was an unspoken understanding that the adventurers who had discovered the dungeon would have the first rights to it. Of course, in cases where adventurers that were not hunters or otherwise not confident in their abilities discovered the dungeon, they could sell the rights to explore the dungeon first through the Adventurers Guild. In cases where multiple adventurer parties discovered the dungeon together, they often negotiated with money or performed the first exploration together. We, Wind Chasers, will explore the dungeon first. What are you saying? We, Steel Wings, are more than suitable for the task. Leave it to us, the White Stars. The rest of you can go and collect some goblin ears or something. However, it seemed that these adventurers had no intention of coming to a compromise, and expecting them to join forces seemed hopeless. This is a problem, though I guess that they were competing against each other since the very start. For a long time, these three adventurer parties had been competing with one another for the title of the best adventurer group in town. However, they had a proper sense of morals as adventurers, so they worked together to overcome the kobold population problem in the past. But that was all. The dungeon that had been discovered had no evidence that any monsters had wandered outside from within, so there was no hurry to explore it. Also, dungeons that appeared outside of the devil's nests were generally not very dangerous and small in size. Therefore, there was no need to cooperate. Any one party could take the dungeon on without a problem. In fact, if the first exploration of the dungeon was successful, the party that completed it would be viewed favorably by the Adventurers Guild, and may even be able to increase their rank to C class. It was a chance for one party to surpass the other two. We Wind Chasers have members that are good at disarming traps. The best your party's thieves can do is conceal their presence and scout, hardly suitable for exploring a dungeon. What the hell are you saying, Cashew? Your party has no healers. Exploring a dungeon relying on only potions is too dangerous. In that regard, we Steelwings have 2 healers who can heal injuries, remove poison, and cure diseases on the spot. What are you talking about? It seems that in short you have a bad balance in members. I'll tell you this, we White Stars are a perfectly balanced party with 1 person on attack and 1 on defense, an archer and a thief, an offensive mage and a healer. You should leave the first exploration of the dungeon to us. Seeing these 3 giving each other angry looks, a fistfight could break out at any moment. Dagon pressed his fingertip against his eyebrows. You 3. We've been having this conversation for 3 days now. Perhaps this would be settled faster if a fistfight really did break out. It took everything in Dagon to resist the temptation to suggest this.